Veteran Salute is sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.
A Great Bend native got to Vietnam 10 days before a series of attacks.
Gwen Bevel and photojournalist Nick Kiefer show us that's when his mission at a hospital there changed quickly.
Rudy Reissig says people rarely talk about what he did during the war, but he says the reality was so many men needed amputations and he had the surgical training. Some parts of Rudy Reissig's experience in Vietnam were like many others.
There's an old saying, you don't give a medic a gun, he's going to hurt himself.
He got one anyway because he had to pull guard duty at times. He says they also gave him 3 shells and some very strict instructions.
You fire the first 2 in the air for warning everybody else, and then you run like hell.
He says he also had to deal with the facilities many soldiers were used to.
Talk about outdoor plumbing.
He says they didn't lay around at the beach too much, but they did spend a lot of time at the enlisted men's club.
Cigarettes were 20 cents a pack, and beer was a dime a can.
He says the guys played plenty of pinochle, and the games offered a nice distressor from their reality.
I scrubbed primarily for a full-bird colonel. That was an orthopedic doctor.
Reissig referred to himself as a bone guy and says he worked from 6P to 6A since he says that's when all the leg wounds would come in.
I was waiting for a helicopter to bring in a guy that we knew was a double amputee coming in.
He says they would often evaluate soldiers, do operations, and whatever else needed to get them sent on.
Then we'd fly them out to Japan.
He says that was until the mission changed.
At midnight, all hell broke loose.
He's talking about the TET Offensive. He says at one time the enemy was trying to knock out a radio station right behind the city of Kinh Nguyen.
With them shooting into the mountain, and every once in a while they'd hit something and
he vividly remembers when they realized they were the target.
I was the first one of 6 through a screen door that opened the other way. Total frame and all came out of that building.
He says they soon realized just how close they had come to being patients in their own hospital.
We woke up the next morning and saw the bullet holes going across the top of the roof.
He says at the age of just 22, he was the old man in the group, and they had many important jobs.
Over there, all rules were off because we had no nurses.
He says the facility's 4 operating rooms could barely keep up.
After TET hit, we went in. I probably never got back to the barracks for 4 days.
He says the doctors relied heavily on the men like him. He says there was a great level of mutual respect as they cared for so many patients in very close quarters.
Those things were sad, especially since everybody was watching him, even from the operating room into recovery. They were trying to say, will he make it, will he make it?
He says they never had any idea what would come in next.
What he had done is walked in front of a grenade launcher, and a grenade was stuck up underneath his rib cage.
He says there was no pin, so the doctor gave him this order.
Just stand there, I'll hand you something and you hand it to that Marine outside.
Reissig says another exciting time required him to rely on his obstetrics training from his stateside service.
She would get up and walk around and her contractions would start. They'd put her on the table and it would stop. And this happened about 3 times. And finally the doctor said, I'm going to go smoke a cigarette. Rudy, sit here and watch this thing. Well, about 30 seconds later, this kid pops out in my lap.
He says regardless of what the job brought, he always kept his sense of humor and found ways to cope with some of the devastating things he saw.
Psychologically, I was trying to save lives.
He says during his time there, they lost very few patients or troops. Reissig got married just months before he left for the war, and they've now enjoyed 53 years together. Here for you, Gwen Bevel, KSN News 3.
The Devon James Injury Lawyers here with Spec 4 Rudy Reissig, who served our country in Vietnam. On behalf of all of Kansas, thank you for your service.
Thank you for the recognition from the field medics to the operating room people to the regurg center to recovery that created their minor miracles over there.
Veteran Salute is sponsored by the Devon James Injury Lawyers.